of communication between us, and as the characteristic of an Irish Catholic working class household. And I had a friend afterward, a fellow afterward, when I spoke one time, saying, "I come from an Italian family, and you know, yours sounded very much like mine." Another guy in a different situation said, "I come from a Latino family, and yours sounded very much like mine." And, you know, it goes on. So there's a kind of universality of these things, I think. But the thing about growing up in these circumstances was books were never, college was not on the agenda, so books were something I learned to love, and bookstores were places where my education came from, and libraries were places where my education came from. College simply was not ever thought of as a possibility. And I never gave voice to this dream of becoming an actor because, as I said, my father would have humiliated me. And I was a very shy kid, so I didn't give voice about that to my friends either. So I just nursed this dream all through school, through high school. Went to Hollywood High School, where movie stars, you know, actually people who people know were there. But I was afraid to step out. I was afraid to stand up in speech class and make a speech because I was so painfully shy. It was just simply beyond my ability. But there was this drive to kind of figure out who I was, and I was trying to figure it out by looking at all the signs that I was getting rather than asking the appropriate questions. And then my father passed away when I was a teenager, and it left that hole that on some levels can never be filled. You find ways to compensate, but that conversation, that individuation that is supposed to happen between father and son never was allowed to happen. So I joined the Marines. Figured if the Marine Corps builds men, maybe they'd build me one. I spent some time going through the motions and trying to figure things out, and learned a few lessons. And the book then is about, I don't know if any of you know the name John O'Donohue. For those of you who are lucky enough to know John, or know John's writing some of his books, maybe here in this store. He's an he passed away just recently. He's an Irishman. He was a close friend and a poet and a philosopher, a former Catholic priest who became a poet and a philosopher, quite an extraordinary mind and a wonderful gift of the language. And he wrote 3 books. One is called Anam Cara, Soul Friend. The second is called Beauty, and it's about the beauty and the divine within us. And the third is brand new, and it's called Bless the Space Between Us. I highly recommend them to you. But I mention John because I think of him all the time, and I think of his words. And one of what he calls it his unfinished poem, and for me it's perfectly finished. He said, "I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding." I thought, oh man. And that's essentially what my book is about, is the surprise of my own unfolding, although he put it better than I did. So in the service I learned some things. I got out of the service, learned some more things. I thought I was doing okay, and I decided I finally, after I got out of the service, mentioned to somebody that I wanted to be an actor, and a friend of mine who had come from Eastern Canada all the way to Los Angeles to develop a career said, "You know, Mike, if you're really serious about being an actor, maybe you ought to do something about it." I thought, well, what does that mean? And he invited me into he was a member of an actor's workshop, and he invited me in, and I did join, and it was, first I sat in the back row and quivered, and then finally worked my way down to the front row, and eventually took part. And that began the climb for a career. At the same time, I was again trying to figure out who this person was, and I got married very young, too young as it turned out. And 3 years later, the marriage fell apart, and I was devastated. Because everything I would get, kind of all the building blocks I had put together to make an identity for myself were building to this point, and I was supposed to be married and live happily ever after, and that didn't work. And I was emotionally at sea, and some friends directed me to what in the parlance today is called a halfway house. And it was a place that was developed by some reforming drug addicts and people with really serious issues. And then when they became very successful at what they were doing in terms of changing, transforming people's lives, they opened it to others, from people from prisons and people from mental institutions and whores and people off the street. And the the straight people like me who was just sort of awash and not knowing. And it was an extraordinary place. As I think about it, it was full of people that my father would have dismissed as social detritus, people that are, beneath us, people who are less. And yet they were some of the most generous and loving people I've ever come across, because they were people who had come to a place in their lives where they began to understand that they were going to die if they continued on the route on which they were traveling. And so that they had to do something, and they found this place which said to them, you've got to learn to tell the truth. You've got to learn to face the truth about yourself, and you've got to learn to tell the truth. You've got to learn to understand what it is, who you are, what you deserve in life, and what you want in life, and learn to have the courage to ask for it. Tough lessons for a lot of people. And their fundamental premise was that all any human being wants are the same three things: love and attention and respect. And it is for want of those things that we do what we do in life. And those who don't get them, those who don't understand about them and get them in their lives, begin to contort themselves into sort of human pretzels, trying to figure out how to get some piece of it, and do most terribly self-destructive things in the process. But the capacity of these people to transform their lives was the most inspiring thing I've ever been seen or been part of. And they helped me. They required me to do the same thing, to look into myself and find out what Mike really was, what this Mike person was about, and learn to ask for those things that I so hungered for, and learn to accept the fact that there might be rejection of my